Well, welcome to the Oxford Polar Forum weekly seminars, where we always try to have some discussion and some around some polar topic. And today we have with us the head of the NERC Arctic Office, Henry Burgess. Thank you for coming. And Henry has quite an experience before being head of the NERC Polar Office between 2012 and 2016. He was the deputy head of the Polar Regions Department of the FCO in the UK, and he graduated in law from Oxford. So he's in a way coming home. And after we invited him, he thought that probably the topic that would be most adequate for him to discuss today could be a general view on the United Kingdom and its involvement in Arctic science. So he's going to be discussing these things. So without further delay, let me welcome Henry again, and Henry, over to you to give your seminar.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate that welcome and the opportunity to speak to you and colleagues today. Kind of thank you very much for that. Yes, my name is Henry Burgess. I am the head of the Natural Environment Research Council Arctic Office. We are a small team of people, myself and one other, based at the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge, and our job is to support the whole of the UK Arctic community, people that are working in the Arctic at the moment, and then people who would like to work in the Arctic. And I would like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of the job that we do, some of the international partnerships that we are helping to create, and in particular, some of the new opportunities that there are coming up and that we might look to in the future. So we'll get started with the presentation. This is the elephant in the room, I think, basically, in that you know, when people think of polar science in the UK, automatically many people think of Antarctic science. They think of how good the UK is at Antarctic science, and they think of all the exciting assets that we have in Antarctica, of which there are many, and they are extremely important. And the UK is very good at Antarctic science. Our job in the Arctic Office is to promote the UK's Arctic interests and capabilities. And one of the things that I was most struck by when I started the job nearly 5 years ago now was how good the UK is at Arctic science. We are genuinely world class at that, at this, and that phrase is used too freely and too often, but it is very true of UK researchers in the Arctic. So if you look on that slide there on the left hand side, you can see that the UK is the fourth most productive country measured by the numbers of papers in peer-reviewed journals when it comes to Arctic science. And that's really dramatic, you know, only after the US, Russia and Canada. That's really incredible. And it's testament to the skills and the commitments of researchers who are based in the UK that the UK is so good at, has such a strong position. And we know, frankly, it's not because the UK, through the research councils or through universities or other grant bodies like Leverhulme, funds all that Arctic science. It's because UK researchers are very good at working with colleagues, they're working internationally. And so a lot of that output comes from science that's funded by other countries, basically, and that is done in partnership with researchers from other countries. That's all fine for us. And that's one of the reasons why we exist as the Arctic Office, is to help promote those opportunities and those connections. And in fact, nearly 2/3 of UK Arctic papers have international co-authors. And when you attend conferences, when you go to workshops, you see that UK researchers are deeply embedded in networks right across the Arctic and beyond. And that's what we're here to support and develop further. So this is essentially what we are here to promote and here to create. It is very much about promoting the science capabilities of the UK of researchers who are based here, not of British researchers, but of researchers who are working in the UK and beyond. This is the current polar research vessel, the James Clark Ross, operating in the Arctic. And we work very closely with the Foreign Office, the UK Science Innovation Network, which are the teams of people based within embassies and high commissions all around the world to promote similarly the UK science interests. And we work very closely. And so this is the message that we are getting across, we hope. And it's true that the UK has an increasingly high profile. Sorry, it's true that the Arctic has an increasingly high profile in the UK, and particularly science in the Arctic. The document you can see on the left-hand side there, Beyond the Ice, is the UK's policy towards the Arctic that was produced in 2018. And on the back of that, there was an inquiry launched by the Environmental Audit Select Committee, which is that box in the middle there, and that's me in a suit, which I haven't worn for 9 months or so, presenting evidence to the committee. And they were very interested in the UK's science position, the capacity that we had, the contacts that we had, whether we did enough, whether we could do more, whether we had the right tools for the job. And Arctic science is much higher in the political mind in the UK than I think Antarctic science is, even though probably we're even better at Antarctic science than we are at Arctic science. And that document on the right-hand side there is from the International Arctic Science Committee, and that's its strategic plan for 2018 to 2023. And it's an example of how organizations, as well as the UK, organizations that have an international responsibility are thinking about what the science priorities will be for the Arctic in the future. And we're very keen to mesh in with those wherever we can. So this is a report that was produced by IASC, the International Arctic Science Committee, about the state of Arctic science. So it's not about the state of the Arctic as such. There's lots of data about what the Arctic itself is like and how that's changing, and it is changing dramatically and irretrievably in many cases. But this is about the state of Arctic science. So what do we know about how the science itself is evolving? And there were a range of recommendations and priorities that came about as a result of that document. That Arctic science must be truly interdisciplinary, that it must increasingly involve and recognize the contributions of indigenous peoples, that there must be much more international and interdisciplinary cooperation, that data sharing, discoverability, access and reuse are still issues, and they need to be resolved, particularly in some communities and for some countries that don't do this as well as others. And that frankly, the current levels of Arctic monitoring and research are insufficient to meet the needs of what we need to know about this particular part of the world that we know has an intimate connection to global climate, and particularly climate for people, for countries like the UK and in the mid-latitudes, which are closer. So there's much that's already been done, but there are these things that we also need to do better, both as countries, but collectively as a research community. And I put these up here because hopefully it will talk to some of the things that we'll be referencing later on in the talk. So I wanted to start with one of the slides, and I'm sorry that we're losing part of the bottom of the slide here. I thought I had sorted this out, but I seem to have failed in that. So that's a learning point for me. So apologies for that, that we're losing part of the bottom of the slide. But this is the most recent Arctic program that's been funded by the Natural Environment Research Council. It's the Changing Arctic Ocean Program. And as you see, it's a £20 million research program over 5 years with dual national funding between the UK and the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. And it's the first time that there has been one of these collaborations between the UK and Germany on this kind of scale, and particularly with this ministry. It involves an enormous number of research institutions, 32, and over 200 investigators. Some examples you can see there, including the University of Oxford. And it's addressing two specific issues. a quantified understanding, to develop a quantified understanding of the structure and functioning of Arctic Ocean ecosystems, and then understanding the sensitivity to multiple stresses and developing projections of change. So it's essentially recognizing that the Arctic Ocean is changing, it is becoming Atlantified, if you like, and ecosystems are changing as they warm and as they adapt. And Arctic species are retreating in some cases, and Atlantic species are pushing northwards. And understanding the pace of that change and how the change is reflecting different pressures is particularly pressing to know. Some of the projects that are being funded through that program are here. These are the four main projects which started in 2017 and will go on to the middle or the end of next year. There's been some changes with COVID and delays, as you will imagine, to some of the work, but they will all finish around the end of next year. So it's looking at how seasonal sea ice controls Arctic productivity. That's in particular connection with the light that's available to the ecosystems and that they rely on. Looking at detecting changes in Arctic ecosystems, and that's fascinating research looking at the isotope markers of ecosystem and how those are held within the bodies of mammals, and how you can use those bodies, those samples, in this case teeth samples that you can look at to detect changes in Arctic ecosystems. Looking at what's happening in the seafloor, so how do changes on the surface of the ocean affect seafloor processes? So in terms of carbon, the bodies of creatures as they die, descending to the bottom, and how that affects the carbon uptake of the seafloor. And then Diapod, the final large project there, which is looking at Calanus, a key Arctic species, and particularly how changes in food availability and light regimes as the ice moves across, as the ice decreases on the top of the ocean, that will change the light that gets down to the depths where these species live. So a real kind of cross section of work from the top of the Arctic Ocean right down to the seafloor. And then there are 12 other projects that are on a slightly shorter timescale, but will also finish next year. And I won't go through these in detail, but you can see that program, it's looking at a whole range of changes that you would expect to see in the Arctic Ocean, fish, nutrients, and how that's affecting Arctic Ocean. So as permafrost thaws, it's releasing nutrients and into the rivers, which then come into the Arctic Ocean. They're feeding those with nutrients potential. So a whole range of different projects that are kind of very interesting there. And we'll be working very closely with all these teams as they finish their work to make a connection between their findings and science and policy impacts for decision makers. So we're keen to make sure that the researchers can publish this information, because that's the whole point of doing it. That's how their research, how people's research careers develop, and that justifies the funding and promotes the quality and the excellence of the work. But we also want to ensure that where there are findings that have policy implications, then those are presented straightforwardly and simply to policymakers, and they can understand them and act on them. One of the things that's significant about the program, the Changing Arctic Ocean program, is the cooperation levels that were involved in the work. So there were cruises on the James Clark Ross, that ship that we showed at the start in the ice. A range of cruises on that ship over 2 or 3 years. But actually the majority of the cruises were collaborations with international partners. So the blue bars you can see there are all the cruises that were involved in the program, and there are many more than we were able to support financially ourselves. And that's the real value of these programs, because you can leverage an enormous amount of infrastructure time and contacts and access through having these international kind of programs and collaborations. And there's no way that the programs would have been able to deliver as much as they have without this kind of international collaboration. And you can see there are partners there that you might not expect particularly to be always straightforwardly able to work with, including Russia. And then there are other partners, Norway and Germany, where those are the kind of connections that we're increasingly used to. One of the other programs that we've been very closely involved in is the MOSAIC program, which is the International Arctic Drift Expedition. This was an undertaking from organized by RV in Germany, the Alfred Wegener Institute, in collaboration with partners in the US and Russia, to freeze in this vessel, the Polarstern, you can see there, into the center of the Arctic Ocean, and let it drift over the top of the ocean with the ocean currents, performing a series of very detailed and varied measurements over the course of a full year. The mission was successful despite COVID and despite some tricky issues that they had to deal with and kind of find innovative ways to solve. And the ship spent more or less a year in the ice, and it got back to Bremerhaven in Germany in October. And we were really pleased that the UK was one of the teams that were able to take part in this initiative, supported by the government and by the Research Council, and the government paying for the berths, the time on the ship, which is a really kind of expensive part of these kind of programs, and then the Research Council paying for the research time and capability. So we had 7 teams in the end with science on the ship over the course of the year, which was fantastic. And they have a very, very good communications and public relations department, our colleagues in RV in Germany, and there will be a series of presentations and events and television programs, I think, that are coming out about this expedition. But it's an example of how in the changing Arctic Ocean, we did this on a small scale, this kind of international collaboration, but here it's writ large on an enormous scale. This is a €100 million project, 10 years in the planning, all the expedition partners that you can see on the screen there. But increasingly, to answer the biggest questions in the Arctic, particularly in the maritime Arctic, and particularly in the dead of night, in the middle of the polar night, is going to take these kind of big collaborations. So in the UK and particularly in the International Arctic Science Committee, we're thinking about what these will be in the future. And we're thinking about ways for the UK to be involved and to help shape some of those. Increasingly, the biggest science questions need these kinds of collaborations, both north and south. So new expeditions and new ambitions need new vessels, need new assets, and we're very lucky that in the UK we have a new polar research vessel, the Sir David Attenborough, which will be available before too long. Image on the left-hand side there. It's hoped that the Sir David Attenborough, it's going through sea trials at the moment. You've probably seen it in the news recently. Sea trials just off Holyhead, and it will have a series of continuing trials and rehearsal cruises, and then it will probably be available for funded science from the end of 2022 or perhaps 2023. So this vessel will be the future of the UK's polar maritime capability for the next 25-30 years, and we're very keen to make sure that it has as much time in the Arctic as it possibly can. In reality, it is a ship that, because it has to supply the Antarctic research stations and do Antarctic science, will spend much more time in the Antarctic than it does in the Arctic. But we would like to make sure this ship has at least as much time in the Arctic in the north as the previous ship did, the James Clark Ross. It is a much bigger ship. It has much wider and deeper capabilities. It has much more laboratory space, room for many more scientists on board, spending longer at sea, a wider range of equipment on board, including the capability to deploy and recover and operate multiple systems at one time using the kind of remote and autonomous vehicles that you can see in the picture on the right-hand side there. Increasingly, this kind of technology will be important in the polar regions, particularly in the Arctic, where it's not always possible to send a ship deep into the ice, and it's not always possible to have an expensive German icebreaker there in the middle of the winter. But with these kinds of tools, as they get better at navigating under ice, as they get better at being recovered after they've gone into the ice, increasingly these are the kind of tools that will allow ships like the Sir David Attenborough to effectively operate much further into the ice than it can actually physically be. This is a little bit small, I appreciate, in terms of the words there, but I hope it gives you a sense of the kind of capabilities of the vessel, and also the kind of outreach that we are going to do, that BAS, as the operator of the vessel, will do in the future. This is a ship that started off with the famous kind of competition, the kind of the near miss of nearly being called Boaty McBoatface, and it started off from its very inception very strongly in the public mind. And although that caused no little consternation amongst some people, it has meant that the ship has continued in the public mind very, very strongly, right from that period through the keel laying, through to the launch, more or less this time last year, and then the kind of the sea trials and beyond. And so there is a genuine effort to connect this ship to the needs of the research community, to make sure that they have been involved all the way through in designing it and making sure it has the kind of equipment that they want to use now, but also in 20, 30 years time, but also to make a connection to the public as well. And this kind of infographic is a part of doing that. This will be a technical, detailed science ship. It will have 25, 30 years of life. It will go to the most inhospitable places on the planet, but it also has a public persona and a public connection that is important for the ship and the people that operate it, but also is potentially important for the scientists that use it as well, because people will be more interested, frankly, in the science that takes place on the ship because it is this ship than they have been in the past, perhaps on other vessels. So that's all to be maximized. Other assets that we have in the Arctic are polar research aircraft. These are aircraft that are operated by the British Antarctic Survey, and there's a range of these aircraft. There are 4 of these twin otters. They mostly operate in Antarctica, but there are 2 which have geophysical and atmospheric sampling instrumentation fitted, and they are available to be used in the Arctic. And you get a sense of their range and their location there on the right-hand side. The way they are used in the Arctic is a bit more complicated than it is in the Antarctic, because the funding for them is not already paid for in the Arctic as it is in the Antarctic. So if you want to use these planes in the Antarctic, you have to pay for the science and you have to pay for postdoc time and all those normal kind of things that go into grants. But the actual use of the aircraft is provided by the Research Council. In the Arctic, we don't have the same position. The use of the aircraft has to be funded through the grant. But there are innovative ways of trading off some of those costs. So because there are so many other partners in the Arctic that want to work with us and want to have access to planes, it's often possible through the grant to trade off fuel and accommodation and time and other things to create a way of accessing these aircraft that makes it work for people's grants. And they have been used most recently in the Arctic in an Iceland Greenland Seas project a couple of years ago, operating from Iceland. So yes, we have the facility for airborne atmospheric measurements, and this aircraft also is also capable of operating in the Arctic, and you can see some images there of it doing that. And it's recently been operating from Svalbard and Alaska, looking at methane emissions several years ago, and then helping to support a project on snow depth and reflectivity in Alaska. So again, that aircraft is available for Arctic research. We also have a station in the Arctic, and this is in Svalbard, in Norway, or kind of far north of the Norwegian mainland, and the station has been there since 1991, Our station is just about right in the middle of the image you can see there, and it is available to be used by any researchers in the UK who are in receipt of a UKRI grant or a Leverhulme grant, or in fact any competitively won amount of money. And it is a way of it is a good opportunity using the station because it is part of a wider community of research stations. So the station looks like that. The image you can see in the top left-hand side there, and it, as I said, it's available to all researchers across the UK. You can be there in basically a day, even though it's so far away. And the support you will receive at the station is provided as part of the deal, as part of the station's capabilities. All you would need to do is fund your flight there and the food and subsistence while you are there. So a lot of the science we support is for a week or a couple of weeks. So it really is a very straightforward place to come and do research. Increasingly, it is the kind of place where people come to test their equipment before they use other, before they take it to other places as well. So the team you can see on the bottom left there is a team from Manchester that were looking at meteorites, and their plan was to use landmine sensing technology to look for the iron essentially in meteorites. And so they came up to our station for a couple of seasons to test that equipment out, and we're very keen that we use the station for that, as well as for what you might think of as kind of hardcore science. The other thing that we do at the station is run an advanced training short course. So this has happened for the last 4 years or so now, and it's an opportunity to learn polar field skills in a real polar setting. So students do a couple of days of coursework in the UK, and then they're flown out to the station, and they can learn field skills actually on the glacier, on the snow, using the boats. And it's a really good opportunity to get to grips with what polar field work is like. We're hoping that this program will run again this season, although because we weren't able to run it last season at the station because of COVID, then it may be that we're holding over some of the same participants from this year to. But we hope this will become this will remain a regular feature. So if you have an interest in working in the polar regions in the future, but you haven't got much experience, then this is a really good way, if you're partway through a PhD or even a kind of an early career postdoc or a master's student, of getting some polar field experience. So we advertise this through the routes I'll kind of share with you at the end, but hopefully this is something that could be interesting. Those are some of the practical things that we do when we are responsible for. We are also very keen to make sort of bilateral connections and links, and in particular that is true of the UK and Russia. So we started out probably back in 2016, 2017 now, bringing together groups of people from the UK and Russia to think about what more we could do together. When you look at a map of Russia, there is absolutely no doubt of the scale of the Russian Arctic and the change that is happening in the Russian Arctic. So the importance of connecting people together from the UK and Russia is undoubtedly vital. One of the particular areas that we wanted to focus on was early career links. And so we majored on bringing together early career researchers from across the UK and Russia, and thinking about what work they could do together. We're conscious that if you make links at an early age, then these are the researchers that will be the postdocs and the science leaders and the grant writers and the professors throughout their career. So providing these early links, we hope will lead on to much longer term projects. So it was fantastic to see an agreement, an MOU, if you like, signed between the UK Polar Network represented on the right-hand side of that image, and then the Apex Russia, the Russian early career polar network on the left. So this is something that's going from strength to strength, and there have now been several field courses. Right, good. Several field courses which have taken place. The most recent one was in February this year. It just snuck in before all the COVID travel disruption, and it took place in Khanty-Mansiysk in Russia, in Siberia, in Western Siberia. And you can see some images there of the students and the lecturers kind of genuinely getting stuck in the snow. And it was very multidisciplinary, so it's not just terrestrial science or a particular discipline. It was very much about introducing people to different disciplines. So the tutors were there from the UK and also from Russia, crossing different disciplines, with the idea of giving people a very broad but meaningful introduction to polar science and Arctic science in particular, both practical skills and more esoteric skills. We've also been keen to help support wider networks of researchers who are perhaps at the next stage of their career. And one of these has been the DEMA network of researchers in the UK, Siberia, and the Russian Far East on environmental change. And this is a network that started out with a relatively small grant supported by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which then turned into a project that could be funded at scale by the Research Council. And this has brought together researchers from Southampton and Newcastle, together with a really big range of researchers in universities and research centres right across Russia, looking at terrestrial change, particularly looking at lake sediments and changes in the permafrost, in the active layer of the permafrost and beyond. And this shows the kind of thing that can grow from fairly small kind of seeds and relatively small undertakings. We've also been keen to recognize that often working in a country like Russia, it's important to build up connections and to build up personal experience before you can think about doing a funded piece of work together. Because it's further away, because there are kind of language difficulties sometimes, because people aren't coming across each other at conferences and workshops where you can exchange ideas in quite the same way as you could perhaps with colleagues from Germany or the US. So we began a bursary program last year began it last year and it ran this year in 2020, funded by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And this has funded 10 teams of people from across the UK to do just that, to make those institutional personal connections with teams across Russia. And people have done incredibly well in what has been a kind of an incredibly difficult year to travel and to work together. So people have had to be very creative about how they can make these connections. But it's looking like there will be a lot of really good work comes from these bursaries and really good connections made. That idea of combining the skills and interests of researchers in the UK together with the skills and interests and equipment and stations and access and data sets and all that kind of thing from colleagues in Russia is really important to us. We're not sure whether this program will run again next year. I don't think it will in quite the same form, but this idea of bursaries is something that we're very keen on, and has certainly worked in other areas as well. One of the things that we would also see ourselves doing is to highlight those research facilities that aren't otherwise known about. So there are a range of research stations in Russia which are part of Interact, which we'll come on to later on, which is a European Union funded transnational access scheme. But there's plenty of stations that aren't. And where the universities in Russia and the institutions that are in charge of these would like to share them and would like to make them available for international collaboration, then that's one of the things that we see ourselves doing and supporting. And this is an example, the White Sea Station, operated by St. Petersburg University. We're also funding and organising together with colleagues in the British Embassy in Moscow and the UK Science Innovation Network a series of webinars. I know everyone's doing webinars at the moment, but we're adding to the mix with ours, focused on UK-Russia connections and potential. And we've had two so far, one with Ugra State University, and then the most recent one with Tomsk State University. And we'll have more of these as well. And this is a really good way, in just over an hour or so, of meeting people who you would be unlikely to see sometimes at other international conferences. And the value of those connections and the potential for joint work is really dramatic. All the people that we are showcasing are people that want to work with colleagues, want to work internationally, have a large amount of experience and skill that they want to share. So this is something that's been really productive, and we're going to do more of. We are also have been funding through the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy a series of bursaries working with colleagues in Canada as well, similar to the Russian ones, but at a bigger scale, and focus more on the research rather than on the personal and practical connections. And in the time available, I won't go into a lot of detail on these. But you can see the kinds of things that are involved. And this is about funding researchers from the UK to join in with Canadian-led projects, bring their skills and experience in partnership with colleagues in Canada. Particularly people that are just setting off on their fieldwork career, people that are established researchers and academics, but perhaps haven't done much fieldwork yet or recently. And this has been a way of supporting them to carry out that work, recognizing that within these big Canadian programs, there's often space for one or two people to slot in and kind of really maximize their time and engagement. And it's led to some really, really good work. These are examples. This slide here is an example from Northumbria University, Dr. Mike Lim and Dr. Paul Mann, who are working with colleagues from Tuktoyaktuk, which is in the very northernmost part of Canada. And the person you can see on the left-hand side there in the black parka is a local resident from the village. And together they are studying the collapse of these permafrost coasts. Just over their heads, you can see the white sections, the kind of white ice lens, if you like, in the permafrost there. And as these melt and thaw, you can see the coast is collapsing and falling into the ocean, and that's affecting the village, which is just behind them. So this is an example of the kind of practical work that we can help support and connect people to, but that also has significant social and wider impacts. We're also thinking more generally about what we can do with Canada. So we have been working for a couple of years now with colleagues in Canada, not just from the NERC perspective, but from many of the other research councils that you can see there, to think what more we can do together. The rate of change in Canada, the rate of warming, permafrost thawing, marine changes, impacts on coastal communities and others is dramatic. And so we're keen to bring, at a larger scale than the bursaries, that experience together with Canadian experience. So we are working kind of hard behind the scenes, and I can't say much more at the moment, but I hope if things continue to go well, we might at some point next year be able to say something more generally about a program of work that we have been working on and can announce. So watch this space for something there. Those are some examples of research. I also wanted to touch briefly in the final few slides on some of the things that are more general connections. And I don't want to go into too much detail about the Arctic Council, but it is one of the ways that the UK engages constructively and effectively with Arctic science. You can see on the right-hand side there all the different working groups that there are for the Arctic Council. Covering pollutants, mercury, black carbon, marine, shipping, environment generally. And whilst we don't have UK experts in each of these groups permanently, we do have representatives from the UK engaged in these groups. but we don't have as many as we could have, and we don't at the moment have a dedicated way of funding that participation other than through a relatively ad hoc means of doing so. So if you or colleagues that you know want to engage in these working groups, then we'll be very keen to hear from you. We can't fund your participation, but increasingly, as we've seen over the last year, you don't need, or 6 months or so, you don't need to be in the same room as other people in order to have an impact. And so I think increasingly we'll find interesting and constructive ways of engaging in these groups beyond that which we have already. The other thing I wanted to flag up is something I was mentioned on one of the previous slides, which was Interact. And this is a very, very important initiative funded by the European Union to support access to field stations across the Arctic. So in the UK, we have one station in Svalbard, but there are scores and scores of other stations that other countries have across Greenland and Norway and Russia in particular, and Canada. And so Interact is a way of getting access to those stations. Importantly, people are only allowed to get access to stations outside their own country. So you can't use the Interact program to access our station, but you can use it to access all the stations in Russia and beyond. And UK researchers have an incredibly good strike record with this program. So about 30% of the money and about 30% of the time goes to UK-based researchers through this project, through this program. So it is really, really effective, and it's a fantastic way to access sites. You can access them in person, and they will pay your airfare and they'll pay your research costs. But you can also access them remotely through accessing remote data, and you can also access them virtually through using kind of online tools and similar kind of constructive ways of accessing them in that way. So the closing dates for next season has closed. It closed kind of earlier on in the year, but the program is just starting a new phase, of which this year is the first year. So do go to that website, and you will find out a lot of information about Interact. And it's something really, really keen, really, really important to be involved with. It was set up by Terry Callaghan, Professor Terry Callaghan, and colleagues. And he is a very powerful and strong advocate for Interact, and he's absolutely right to do so. It's a very, very good program. We also have coming up next year on the 13th to the 15th of September, the UK's Arctic Conference, which will be hosted by Durham University. All we have at the moment are the dates, so there's no registration yet or anything else to kind of worry about or get involved in the detail of. But that is a really good opportunity to come and meet researchers who are interested in the Arctic and enthusiastic about the Arctic. Durham is one of our top universities, there's no doubt about that when it comes to Arctic science. And they have the Durham Arctic Doctoral Training and Research Centre, which is going great guns at the moment. And that's one of the reasons why they were so keen to host this conference. It's very informal, it doesn't cost anything to come. It's straightforward. You have a good chance of getting your abstract presented because it's not AGU or EGU. It's very informal, but it's a really good place to make connections and think about kind of opportunities and to meet people who are like-minded. So do stay switched on for that. Final couple of slides now. I've mentioned lots of kind of opportunities and the station and all kinds of things, and really the way to find out more about those is to visit our website, arctic.ac.uk, and particularly to subscribe to our mailing list, which you'll find on the website. We don't send out a lot of information every week. You won't get deluged, but you will find out about bursaries, any change to the station, if we're looking for particular people to help represent us within the Arctic Council, all those kinds of things will come that way. And there are a surprising amount of opportunities once you begin to look. So please do think about subscribing to the bulletin. And that's it. Thank you very much indeed. These are all my contact details. We are genuinely here to support you. We are here to support the whole of the UK's Arctic community, but also people that aren't yet Arctic researchers that might be in a different field, that think they could apply their interests and their research to the Arctic. So please do get in contact. We have Twitter and all those kind of things there as well. We are very much here to support you. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the technical problems, but thank you for your patience and forbearance. And if there's time, I'm very happy to answer any questions and take part in discussions. So thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, well, about the technical problems, what can we do? We're lucky to actually be able to do these things anyway. We were discussing with you some days ago that 10 years ago this situation would have meant very different things than this year. So despite the technical problems, we were able to follow. So don't worry about that. There are some questions in the chat, especially by Tom, who seems to have many, and then Maria basically highlighting some of Tom's questions. So I think, Tom, you had 2 or 3 questions. If you want to start with one, and then we get the discussion going.
Yeah, firstly, hi Henry, good to see you all the way in Cambridge.
Hi Tom, good to see you again. Hi.
Yeah, so well, you might have heard it before, but because it's rant number 3, but I really appreciate the need for a large vessel and a large polar presence. I mean, it's partly a presence in Antarctica and the Arctic. However, those large inflexible vessels encourage large science, and actually a lot of the real step changes have come from small expeditions that are flexible, independently funded. I mean, how do you see that being supported within the Arctic community via the UK?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because you're right. I mean, although the sums of money involved in buying a new ship and commissioning it and all of that kind of thing are significant, it's a prestige vessel, and that's important. So those kinds of things can. There's a reason why. It's understandable why those things have to happen. I mean, we need a research vessel. We need a vessel to resupply the stations in Antarctica. And if you are creating a vessel, then you may as well create one that can do more than one job. And I think the SDA will be a prime example of ships that can do more than one job. And through through its ability to deploy remote assets and autonomous vehicles, and it can be in more than one place at one time, and it can do as well as whilst being it can be a hub for all those different things that happen kind of from the ship. So that gives you scale. It's not just the winches or the trawls that you take from the main vessel, it's all the other things that can happen as well. But you're right that it's important that there are other connections that can happen as well. And through the Changing Arctic Ocean program, you could see this on the slide there about how many other smaller cruises had taken place. And perhaps that's one of the things that will happen in the future, that people will get better at exchanging time on vessels. At the moment, most countries use their vessels for their own science. But in the future, with bigger vessels like the SDA, there will need to be a capability of getting international partners onto the vessel. So perhaps if one team comes onto your ship, then you can use their ship in the future. That happens a bit at the moment, but I think we'll see even more of that. And if that means using time on someone else's smaller vessel or series of smaller vessels, well, that might be one way of doing it. I mean, to be honest, the bursary funds showed us how much you can do with fairly small amounts of money, but it does rely on the host organizations providing quite a lot for free. So, providing free ship time or free time in helicopters or other things, and you can't always rely on people to do that for free all the time. But through the bursaries, that was one way of doing some of that. A broader range of smaller but important things.
I really appreciate the sentiment, and actually I hope that is something that might actually be conveyed to the Antarctic as well. It's a different landscape, but if that works in the Arctic, there's no reason it couldn't. in the works in the Arctic, it should be able to work in the Antarctic.
So Tom, next week we're going to have Jane Francis. So that's going to be your chance to ask the same question.
I will have questions for her too.
Yeah, ask the boss the really difficult questions, not me.
There seemed to be a related question because Maria Dance there was raising her hand. There is also questions from Matilda here and other questions from Tom. So Maria, if that was following on from Henry, your turn. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Henry. Thanks for the great talk. I'm a PhD student at Oxford. Yes, it's building on what you were just talking about, really, because I noticed, or it seems to me, that the RSS Attenborough is like primarily a marine cruise ship. Like they have the cranes and the winches and the labs and everything for like sampling anything from the ocean, which is really good. But I feel like, yeah, I don't know how much a ship like that could be used like for transport to like maybe remote islands for terrestrial work, where otherwise there are really big logistical and transport challenges, because a big ship like that would be useful, but I feel like at the same time, it's probably, people say it's wasting resources from taking away from marine cruises. And I saw the airplanes, actually, I didn't know about those, so that's interesting. But at the same time, the benefits of having a boat, even for a terrestrial expedition, are good, because you can have this like, accommodation anchored offshore and then you can return to it. Whereas like with an airplane, you kind of fly in and out, and if there's no infrastructure at the place you're studying, then you're kind of screwed a bit. So I don't know, what's your feeling on how, that big ship could relate to terrestrial studies, maybe, if at all, or if we should look at airplanes? And because it's kind of this problem of big vessels versus small vessels, as Tom was saying.
It's a really good question. I mean, at the moment, literally this week, there's a big seminar science session going on about how the ship should be used in the future. Because you have to build, you have an idea about how it will operate, then you build the ship, and then you get into the detail of actually how it's operated and how it will work. And I think because the ship is bigger and the science capacity is bigger, there will need to be a kind of a clever way of, whilst there is kind of main funded science programs on the vessel, there will be capacity around that, and how to fill those extra berths with people is something that's being thought about at the moment. But I think there will be capacity to slot people in who want to study the terrestrial environment, because if you're going somewhere coastal, then there's no reason why you couldn't potentially drop people off to do their research and then come and pick them up as part of this ongoing network. Although it is obviously a ship, it's first and foremost a science platform, and the idea is that it can do lots of things all at the same time. It has smaller boats that can be deployed into coastal waters, that can get people on shore, that can do shallow survey work and sampling work. So it really is a platform that can move from place to place, obviously in the marine environment, but that can support a lot more than just the obvious kind of big marine projects. It has the capacity to have helicopters on board. It won't have helicopters all the time, but it'll have them as they are needed and as they're funded through the science. And that's also one way of accessing terrestrial sites from the boat, from the ship.
All right, thanks. It's good to hear.
Thank you, Henry. Tom, you had another question, but let's give Matilda a chance, because she basically wrote that she has 3 questions. She only wrote 1, so Matilda, fire.
Thanks,
fire
Mark. I won't give all of the 3 questions now, just to let other participants have a go through. But thanks, Henry. That was really, really interesting and great to sort of get a perspective of the people who sort of control and allocate the funding, about where it's all going, I suppose. And when you were describing all of the activities that our researchers are involved in the Arctic, what came to mind was how this is supported in terms of provisions and that kind of thing. Because I'm aware that in the Antarctic, the military often helps supply the British Antarctic Survey and that sort of thing. And I was wondering what kind of involvement the military has in the Arctic research, and whether there's a kind of like geopolitical dynamic to this, because it seems like even though there's somewhat frosty tensions between the UK and Russia, there's a big push to have science collaboration in that area. And I was just wondering if you could sort of discuss that dynamic a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yes, you're right. The Royal Navy does play a modest role in supporting British Antarctic Survey in Antarctica, but there is no similar role for the UK in the north. It's a fully civilian operation. There have been some opportunities in the past for collaboration. So when the UK used to send submarines up into the very far north of the Central Arctic Ocean, then there were opportunities then for ice data to be collected and kind of fed back and declassified. So there were some kind of connections through those routes. Most countries, it depends really on the setup of countries' assets. So through Canada, the operation of some Coast Guard vessels in Canada supports science activities. There's no doubt about that. But in the UK, not so much. I don't know the detail of Russia in particular, but there is a strong desire, I think, to keep a balance to be struck between using all available assets and ships and planes to study part of the world which needs more research and analysis and more monitoring and data collection, and also keeping things as civilian as possible. So there isn't quite the same reliance on naval assets in the Arctic as there is in the Antarctic. I think that's probably true to say.
Thanks, Henry. I had one question before we jump into. There is still a couple at least of other questions that we will discuss. But one question I have is about Brexit and the fact that you have been stressing a lot international collaboration and sometimes bilateral collaborations between the UK and other countries for research opportunities. And the question is quite concrete. It's not about opinion, but about whether NERC Arctic Office has been thinking about the consequences of Brexit and whether there is any provision or any some sort of action plan to adapt to this new situation.
Yeah, it's an issue of such scale that it's beyond our office of two people. So there are teams within the Natural Environment Research Council and particularly within UKRI that are dealing with government and are keeping their ear very closely to the ground on what's happening and are thinking and planning. The government commitment is that anyone that's won funding through Horizon 2020 or similar programs, that funding will be honoured post December, and so all that funding will still be honoured and still there. What happens beyond that, I can't shed any further light on. These are the decisions that are about to be taken, and I genuinely don't know. We are remaining optimistic, as other people are optimistic, that the right things will happen and the UK will not lose access to these very valuable funds and sources of support. We have just joined the European Polar Network 2, the kind of the second iteration of European Polar Network, and that's all about bringing together European expertise in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and looking at best practice and maximizing our impact, and looking in particular at the societal impacts of change in the polar regions, and thinking about what more we need to do in terms of research. So the UK is part of that and will be part of that for the next 3 or 4 years. We are a key player in the European Polar Board, and that's when we have been for 20 years or so. And our membership of the European Polar Board will continue whatever happens with access to Horizon 2020 or similar funds. So we remain optimistic. Everyone wants the UK to have access. That's everyone's starting point. It just remains to be seen whether it can happen. But we cross our fingers.
Thanks. Tom had a question about science to policy translation. Do you want to ask this question, Tom?
Yeah. So I don't think I thanked you for a great talk. So thank you for that. Before
Very welcome. Very welcome.
Ask all the questions. But no, I really appreciated the link between science and policy. In particular, I thought that was, I thought really good sentiment, and it seemed like you had a mechanism for that for the big existing projects. The problem with the UK and the Arctic is that it doesn't really even permit. So what's the mechanism for working out what UK science is out there in an Arctic context and getting that into policy? I mean, how do we update policymakers via the UK on UK Arctic science?
Yeah, well, there's various routes. There's the all-party parliamentary group on the polar regions, and although that hasn't met for the last 6-9 months or so, that's a very good route for kind of getting knowledge directly into a small group of policymakers in Parliament. We have run sessions in the past at conferences and events, and we've run kind of a bespoke session in Whitehall in government departments for policy and decision makers. But the skill is very much to not give them the academic papers, but you have to give them a specific product for them which speaks to them. And that's not about simplifying things, but it's about putting it in language that makes sense to policy and decision makers. And so we've done that kind of directly. And we've also worked with the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. They have a very good scheme and good opportunities to link into parliamentarians. So we've worked with them in the past on events and conferences. And I think increasingly it needs to be designed into projects at the start. So it is something that some researchers are very good at thinking about at the start of their projects, and it's something that not that others are not. But increasingly knowing what kind of outcome you could come out with that speaks to a policymaker. Is it about the future of fish stocks or deep sea mining or whatever else? Even if it's only a contribution to that, knowing what that is at the start means that you don't then have to chase around 3 years into your project finding the particular impact to satisfy someone like me when they come to you for a conference or an event. But there are so many Arctic conferences and events that there's no shortage of opportunities to speak to people, and they are more interdisciplinary, those events, than I think Antarctic ones are. You tend to get shipping folk and tourism experts and mining people at events anyway, and so they're all there to speak to. You just need to find the right ways to do it.
In that case, sorry if I can follow up. Having been an Antarctican and moved to the Arctic, what lessons can we take from that to Antarctica? Sorry.
I don't know. It's a tricky one. I mean, the thing that strikes me going from the Antarctic to the Arctic is looking backwards, how few opportunities there are in the Antarctic world to meet people outside your particular sphere. So there's the Antarctic Treaty Meeting, which is all politicians. There's SCAR, Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, which is all researchers. There's the tourism event through IATA, which is all tourist operators and a few others. But there isn't a lot of mixing. Whereas in the Arctic, a lot of the time people are mixed up together, because if you're thinking about all these issues, they have a natural impact on all the others. And because the Arctic is populated by 4 million people, that has a natural, there are more issues to consider. So it's a more interconnected and complicated, I would argue, area. So perhaps the Antarctic would never be like that, and there wouldn't be the same reason to have those kind of conferences and events. But that's one of the reasons why it's easier in the Arctic, because people are getting together more often, and they're getting together in more diverse groups, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Henry. We are getting kind of into the last minutes of the discussion, but Matilda, you had more than one question, so I'm sure you remember another one at least.
Yeah, thank you. It's just a short one. And I was wondering whether you could just discuss how much space there is for social science research not being a natural scientist myself and wanting to continue being involved in Arctic research after my PhD finishes, I'd sort of be keen to know what kind of avenues there are for me to sort of look at.
Yeah, for sure. So social science is very strong in the Arctic. One of the working groups within IASC, the International Arctic Science Committee, is a social sciences working group, basically. And that's very active and very well connected. And IASC run a fellowship scheme, which is just closed for this year, literally just closed for this year, but they run it annually. And that's a very good way of getting connected to that network of social scientists. There is a social science Arctic organization, IASA, IASSA, which organizes lots of events and is very active in the field of social sciences. Although we're the NERC Arctic office, we do look beyond just the natural environment. So where we can support social science and make connections to social science, then we do. So many of the impacts of the change that are happening in the Arctic have social science impact. So it's all part of the same piece. And the bigger piece of work I was talking about between the UK and Canada that we're working on, social science will be a big part of that, because it's not just about the environmental change in Canada, it's about the impact of that environmental change on the communities that live there. And buildings are collapsing, their coasts are collapsing, energy is getting more expensive, the foods that they rely on are changing and are becoming scarce or available in different areas or quantities. So all of those have social science impacts. So there's a really big push for all the science in the Arctic to be much more interdisciplinary. And when you consider the very strong rationale for indigenous communities to share their traditional and local knowledge, and not just for it to be shared, but for it to be kind of recognized and carry equal weight to traditional Western science, if you like, then that means that social science aspect is really strong and important. So yeah, they're really good links.
Okay, thank you.
If you want to follow up with me afterwards with an email, I'd be very happy to share some contacts and to put you in contact with some.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
We're here to help. So
yeah, great.
No
That's great. That makes me I think that we cannot end in a better way than actually having direct collaboration stemming from these events. So if anyone else has any question, but it should be short because people have lives and we have to move on, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I see no other questions. So otherwise, I will thank you again, Henry, for your time and for your talk. It's been comprehensive and very clearly displayed. So thank you very much, and for the discussion. Thank you, the rest of the audience, the ones who are remaining after the o'clock time, for your questions and your interactivity on this session. So next week we have the last seminar of the term, and as I said before, Professor Jane Francis, the head of the British Antarctic Survey, will be talking about potentially the research priorities as she sees them for the British Antarctic Survey in either Antarctica only or in the polar regions in general. That's to be confirmed. So stay tuned for that, and see you around so far in Zoom. Bye bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.